Subscribe if you hate Karens, and comment where you're watching this video from. Joshua Dawson, a man of quiet dignity and unwavering moral compass, was a police officer in the truest sense of the word. A guardian of peace, a protector of the innocent. He lived a life dedicated to upholding the law and serving his community. He wasn't one for confrontation, preferring diplomacy and understanding whenever possible. But even the most patient soul has its limits, and Joshua was quickly approaching his. His neighbor, Karen Winters, was a constant source of aggravation, a veritable thorn in his side. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the embodiment of entitlement and prejudice, a walking, talking stereotype that seemed to thrive on discord and resentment. From the moment Joshua, a black man, had moved into the quiet suburban neighborhood, Karen had made her displeasure known. It wasn't overt. There were no screamed racial slurs or blatant acts of vandalism. Instead, it was a constant stream of microaggressions, passive-aggressive comments, and suspicious glares. She'd complain about the noise coming from his house, even when he was out or simply reading a book. She'd question his visitors, scrutinizing them with an unsettling intensity. She'd find fault with his landscaping, his car, even the way he walked. Each incident, while seemingly insignificant on its own, chipped away at Joshua's patience and sense of belonging. He often wondered what he had done to deserve such treatment, but the answer was always glaringly obvious. He was black, and in Karen's narrow worldview, that was enough. The most egregious of Karen's offenses, however, was her blatant trespassing on his property. Joshua had invested a considerable amount of his savings in a backyard jacuzzi, a place where he could unwind after long, stressful shifts. It was his sanctuary, his escape. But Karen, in her twisted sense of entitlement, seemed to believe that she had a right to it. Joshua had caught her on multiple occasions, sneaking into his backyard while he was at work and luxuriating in the jacuzzi as if she owned it. The first time, he had confronted her directly, calmly but firmly telling her that she was trespassing and needed to stay off his property. Karen had responded with a dismissive wave and a condescending remark about how he probably didn't even use it anyway. She'd even insinuated that his purchase of the jacuzzi was some sort of attempt to inflate his status. He had considered calling the police, but he hesitated. He knew that involving the authorities would only escalate the situation and potentially create even more animosity. He also worried about the optics. A black police officer arresting a white woman in a predominantly white neighborhood. It would become a media circus. Instead, he installed security cameras, hoping that the mere presence of surveillance would deter her. It worked for a while, but Karen's audacity knew no bounds. She seemed to view the cameras as a challenge, a game to be won. She started wearing disguises, large hats, sunglasses, and even a fake mustache to evade detection. Joshua knew this because he reviewed the footage, the anger simmering within him with each viewing. He was at his wits' end, his sanctuary violated, and his patience wearing thin. He knew he had to put a stop to this madness, once and for all. The last straw came on a particularly sweltering Tuesday. Joshua had worked a double shift, dealing with a string of domestic disputes and a tense standoff. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. All he wanted was to come home, soak in his jacuzzi, and let the warm water ease his aching muscles. But as he pulled into his driveway, he spotted Karen, clad in a floral swimsuit and sipping a drink, lounging in his jacuzzi. The sight ignited a fury within him, a cold, controlled anger that he rarely allowed himself to feel. This wasn't just about trespassing anymore. It was about disrespect, about the blatant disregard for his property and his personhood. It was about the constant, relentless undermining of his right to simply exist in peace. He parked his car, his hands clenched into fists. He considered confronting her directly, but he knew that would only lead to another shouting match, another round of empty threats and hollow promises. He needed a different approach, a strategy that would send a clear, unequivocal message that her behavior was unacceptable and would not be tolerated. He decided to play along, to let her think she was getting away with it, but to set a trap that she wouldn't see coming. He quietly entered his house, careful not to make a sound. He changed into his uniform, the familiar weight of his badge and gun providing a strange sense of reassurance. He knew he couldn't use his authority to physically harm her, but he could use his knowledge of the law and his understanding of human psychology to orchestrate a situation that would finally bring her reign of terror to an end. He pretended to leave for work, backing his car out of the driveway and driving around the block. He parked a few streets away, out of sight, and waited. He knew Karen was watching, that she would be waiting for him to leave before resuming her illicit soak. He waited for about 2 hours, the sun beating down on his car, the anger simmering inside him. He replayed the security footage in his mind, each image fueling his resolve. He thought about the countless times he had bitten his tongue, had tried to be the bigger person, had tried to reason with someone who was clearly unreasonable. He realized that his attempts at diplomacy had been interpreted as weakness, as an invitation to continue her harassment. He knew he couldn't let that happen anymore. Finally, he saw her emerge from her house, clad in a different swimsuit and carrying a small bag. She glanced around furtively, confirming that he was indeed gone, before heading towards his backyard. He waited a few minutes, giving her time to settle in, before quietly approaching his property from the rear. He had a plan, a risky plan, but one that he believed would finally put an end to Karen's madness. He had spent the past few weeks researching various non-toxic, fast-acting thickening agents that could be added to water without causing harm, but would drastically alter its viscosity. He had chosen one that was commonly used in the food industry, a tasteless, odorless powder that would quickly turn the water into a thick, gelatinous substance. He knew it wouldn't be pleasant, but it wouldn't be dangerous. It would, however, be incredibly embarrassing and deeply inconvenient for Karen. He crept through the bushes, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached the edge of the jacuzzi, peering over the fence. Karen was exactly where he expected her to be, lounging back with her eyes closed, a smug look on her face. He took a deep breath, steeling his nerves. This was it. He retrieved the container of thickening agent from his pocket and carefully poured it into the jacuzzi. The powder dissolved almost instantly, creating a subtle cloudiness in the water. Karen, oblivious to the change, remained blissfully unaware of the impending predicament. Joshua watched as the water slowly began to thicken, the viscosity increasing with each passing second. He could see Karen's hair starting to cling to the sides of the jacuzzi, her skin becoming coated in a slimy film. She finally opened her eyes, a look of confusion spreading across her face. She reached out to touch the water, pulling her hand back with a grimace. "What the?" she muttered, her voice laced with annoyance. She tried to stand up, but her legs felt like they were encased in concrete. The water had become so thick that it was nearly impossible to move. Panic began to set in. "Joshua, is that you?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. He stepped out from behind the bushes, his face a mask of grim determination. "Yes, Karen, it's me," he said, his voice low and steady. "I think it's time we had a little chat about boundaries and respecting other people's property." Karen's face flushed crimson with anger and humiliation. "You did this, didn't you?" she spat, struggling to free herself from the increasingly viscous water. "You're going to regret this, Joshua. I'm going to sue you for everything you've got." "Sue me for what, Karen?" Joshua retorted, his voice unwavering. "For protecting my property? For finally standing up to your harassment? You're the one who's been trespassing, Karen. You're the one who's been violating my privacy and disrespecting my rights, and now you're finally going to face the consequences." He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "I'm reporting a trespasser on my property," he said into the phone, his voice calm and professional. "The individual is currently incapacitated in my jacuzzi and requires assistance." He gave his address and waited for the dispatcher to confirm the information. Karen continued to struggle, thrashing and flailing in the thickening water. The more she moved, the more difficult it became to escape. The water was now the consistency of thick jelly, clinging to her body like a suffocating shroud. She started to cry, her makeup running down her face. "Please, Joshua," she pleaded, her voice choked with desperation. "Please help me. I'm stuck. I can't get out." Joshua looked at her, his expression unreadable. He felt a flicker of sympathy, but he quickly suppressed it. He reminded himself of all the times she had disrespected him, of all the times she had tried to undermine him, of all the times she had made his life miserable simply because of the color of his skin. He knew that if he helped her now, she would never learn her lesson. He needed to teach her that her actions had consequences, that she couldn't continue to treat people with such blatant disregard. He maintained his stance, watching her struggle, the silence broken only by her sobs and the sounds of sirens in the distance. He knew that the authorities would be arriving soon, and he needed to be prepared to explain his actions. He had already rehearsed his statement in his mind, carefully, outlining the history of Karen's harassment and the measures he had taken to try to stop her trespassing. He knew that some people might see his actions as excessive, but he believed that he was justified in protecting his property and defending himself against her relentless attacks. He hoped that the police would understand his perspective and that they would hold Karen accountable for her actions. The first police car arrived, followed by an ambulance. 2 officers approached the backyard, their expressions a mixture of confusion and amusement. They surveyed the scene, Karen trapped in the gelatinous jacuzzi, Joshua standing calmly nearby, and the faint scent of thickening agent in the air. "What's going on here, Officer Dawson?" one of the officers asked, his voice tinged with incredulity. Joshua explained the situation, detailing Karen's history of trespassing and the events that had led to her current predicament. The officers listened attentively, their initial amusement fading as they grasped the full extent of the situation. They approached the jacuzzi, assessing Karen's condition. She was clearly distressed, but she didn't appear to be in any immediate danger. "Ma'am, can you hear us?" one of the officers asked. "We're going to help you get out of there." Karen nodded weakly, her eyes filled with tears. The officers called for backup, requesting additional personnel and equipment to assist in the rescue. They carefully entered the jacuzzi, attempting to navigate the thick gelatinous water. It was slow and arduous work, their movements hampered by the viscous substance. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they managed to free Karen from the jacuzzi. She was covered in the sticky gel, her hair matted and her clothes clinging to her skin. She was shivering and visibly shaken. The paramedics examined her, confirming that she was physically unharmed but emotionally distraught. They wrapped her in a blanket and escorted her to the ambulance for further evaluation. The officers turned their attention to Joshua, informing him that they would need to take a statement and conduct a thorough investigation. He cooperated fully, providing them with all the information they requested and showing them the security footage that documented Karen's trespassing. As Karen was being led away, she glared at Joshua, her eyes filled with hatred. "You haven't heard the last of this, Joshua Dawson," she hissed. "I'm going to make you pay for what you've done." Joshua met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "I'm not afraid of you, Karen," he said firmly. "I've done nothing wrong. I've simply defended my property and protected myself from your harassment, and I'm confident that the law will be on my side." The aftermath of the jacuzzi incident was a whirlwind of activity. The police conducted their investigation, interviewing Joshua, Karen, and several other neighbors. The story quickly spread throughout the neighborhood, becoming the subject of intense speculation and gossip. Some neighbors sided with Joshua, applauding his courage in standing up to Karen's harassment. Others criticized his methods, arguing that he had gone too far and that he should have simply called the police instead of taking matters into his own hands. The local news media picked up the story, sensationalizing it with headlines like "Black Officer Traps Karen in Gelatinous Jacuzzi" and "Suburban Spat Turns Sticky." Joshua found himself the subject of intense scrutiny, his every action dissected and analyzed by the public. He received a flood of phone calls, emails, and social media messages, both positive and negative. Some people hailed him as a hero and a symbol of resistance against racial prejudice, while others condemned him as a vigilante and a disgrace to the police force. The Internal Affairs Division of the police department launched its own investigation into the incident, examining Joshua's conduct and determining whether he had violated any departmental policies. He was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation, a move that further fueled the media frenzy. Despite the pressure, Joshua remained calm and composed. He knew that he had acted in self-defense and that he had not broken any laws. He cooperated fully with the investigations, providing them with all the information they requested and trusting that the truth would ultimately prevail. Karen, meanwhile, was seething with rage and humiliation. She hired a lawyer and filed a lawsuit against Joshua, accusing him of assault, battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She claimed that he had deliberately set a trap for her and that he had caused her severe physical and emotional harm. She demanded a substantial sum of money in damages, claiming that the incident had ruined her reputation and caused her irreparable psychological trauma. Joshua's legal team prepared a vigorous defense, arguing that Karen had been trespassing on his property and that he had acted reasonably to protect himself from her harassment. They presented evidence of her prior acts of trespassing, including the security footage and the testimony of other neighbors. The legal battle dragged on for months, becoming increasingly acrimonious and draining on both parties. The case attracted widespread media attention, turning Joshua and Karen into household names. The trial was a spectacle, with lawyers presenting conflicting accounts of the events and witnesses offering differing perspectives. The jury ultimately sided with Joshua, finding him not liable for any of Karen's claims. They concluded that he had acted reasonably in defending his property, and that Karen had been the aggressor in the situation. The verdict was a resounding victory for Joshua, a vindication of his actions, and a rejection of Karen's attempts to portray him as a villain. The internal affairs investigation was also concluded, finding that Joshua had not violated any departmental policies and that he was cleared to return to duty. The community largely rallied around Joshua, appreciating his dedication to his job and his resilience in the face of adversity. The support he received was overwhelming, a testament to the fact that most people recognized him. Karen, on the other hand, was left humiliated and financially depleted. Her lawsuit had backfired spectacularly, damaging her reputation and costing her a fortune in legal fees. She became a pariah in the neighborhood, ostracized by her former friends and neighbors. She eventually sold her house and moved away, seeking to escape the shame and notoriety that had become her constant companions. Joshua's jacuzzi was beyond repair, the thickening agent having permanently damaged the jets and the filtration system. He considered replacing it, but he ultimately decided that he no longer wanted it. The joy he had once found in his backyard oasis had been tainted by Karen's intrusion, and he could no longer bear to be reminded of her presence. Instead, he used the insurance money to invest in home security system, taking extra precautions to safeguard his property and protect himself from future harassment. He also became an advocate for racial justice and police reform, using his platform to speak out against prejudice and discrimination. He shared his story with others, hoping to inspire them to stand up to injustice and to fight for a more equitable society. The ordeal had changed Joshua, hardening him in some ways, but also making him more determined than ever to uphold the law and to serve as a positive role model for his community. He learned a valuable lesson about the importance of setting boundaries and defending oneself against those who seek to undermine one's rights. He also realized that even in the face of adversity, it is possible to find strength and resilience within oneself. Years later, Joshua would occasionally reflect on the jacuzzi incident, remembering the anger, the frustration, and the sense of helplessness he had felt in the face of Karen's relentless harassment. He would also remember the validation, the support, and the sense of empowerment he had experienced after finally standing up for himself. He knew that he had done the right thing, even if it had been a difficult and unconventional choice. He had faced his tormentor, he had defended his property, and he had emerged victorious. And in the process, he had become a symbol of hope and resilience for others who had suffered from prejudice and discrimination. While his jacuzzi was ruined, the peace of mind and the sense of justice he gained were priceless.